It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation.
The teaching of Balaam. Welcome to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we are so glad you've chosen to join us today. We are continuing our discussion of Pergamum.
All are correct, actually.
I know.
And we've got a number of things to discuss today that are really interesting. I want to focus on a couple of things that we touched on last week, but I think we can expand on today. We talked several weeks ago about how the 7 churches of Revelation represent different ages in church history. Mm-hmm. And so I thought we could start today with discussing the age that Pergamum represents.
Oh, I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, it typically is considered a symbol of the church age between about 312 or 313 AD and the year 606. And the reason those dates were chosen for Pergamum, and we'll then talk about how Jesus' praise and criticism fits that age. In the year 312, or 313 actually, there was a decree from Constantine and a co-emperor, Licinius, who then was defeated by Constantine. But Constantine, who reportedly saw a cross in the sky and heard a voice saying, "Under this sign, conquer." Mm-hmm. And he recognized that as the symbol of Christianity.
But under this sign, conquer,
right,
doesn't sound like something Jesus would say.
No, that's exactly right. It isn't.
Sounds like something that Islam would say.
It
Muhammad.
Exactly is. What we see in the Church of Pergamum, thanks to the Edict of Milan, is a church that began to compromise with the world. Pergamum is considered the church of compromise. It began to become a means to an end that is temporal or political power, or worldly wealth, whereas up to that point, especially in the decade or so before the edict, Christians had been pretty heavily persecuted. In fact, the most brutal persecution in Christian history really took place between about 303 and 313. There were 4 emperors at the time in 303, Diocletian, Maximian, Galerius, and Constantius. In February of 303, they rescinded what rights Christians had accrued in the Roman Empire. And at this time, that covered everything from Britain to the frontier in Mesopotamia, the frontier with Persia. So that led to a series of really brutal persecution. If they wouldn't worship the gods, worship the emperor, they could be stripped of property, stripped of their rights. It really drove the church underground. Mm-hmm. Churches that had been built
literally drove them underground, the hypogeas.
Exactly. So by 313, those emperors had all kind of left the stage. They turned over power. Constantine unified the empire under his own rule, set up Constantinople, which was the new capital in the eastern part of the empire, to try to make this large, unwieldy collection of various tribes and peoples under one government. But interestingly, although Constantine gets the rule for this, one of the outgoing emperors, Galerius, in the previous year, in April of 311, issued an edict of toleration from a city in what is now Bulgaria, Sofia, Bulgaria. At the time it was called Serdica. That granted Christianity the status of worship recognized and approved under the Roman Empire, but it wasn't until Constantine kind of legalized it that it became kind of the norm and accepted. And then, of course, we know Constantine did a number of other things that kind of married the church to the state, even though it wasn't the official religion of the Roman Empire until the year 380 under Theodosius. Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea in 325. Now, a lot of skeptics will say that's where Constantine dictated what was going to be in the Bible. That is not the case.
No.
The canon of Scripture was pretty much settled by the middle of the 2nd century. So that's a myth, by the way. If you hear somebody say, well, Constantine, no, that's not true.
Yeah, sounds like a Dan Brownism.
It is. So February of 380, Theodosius officially adopted Trinitarian Nicene Christianity as the official religion of the empire, and anyone who did not subscribe to the Nicene Creed and the doctrine of the Trinity was a heretic. And there were a number of heresies that led to other councils, like the Arian heresy, which believed that Jesus was a created being and thus distinct and subordinate to the Father. Of course, Christian doctrine is that Jesus is God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one. But unlike today, where we can disagree over doctrine, and there are certain essentials over which we will not compromise, we don't stone people we disagree with anymore or burn them at the stake. But that was what was happening in the Roman Empire of the 4th and then the 5th centuries. Interestingly, by the 5th century, in the 400s, a hierarchy had already taken shape, what was called a pentarchy, 5 patriarchies or sees, holy sees, with an order of primacy, Rome being the first among equals, supposedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like Octavius,
Let's see,
Caesar
the four
Augustus.
of you down here supporting me at the top.
Right.
Oh, pyramid.
Yeah. So you had Rome, Constantinople, which was the second capital of the Roman Empire, then Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. Those were the 5 main centers of Christian doctrine, Christian authority, Christian hierarchy back in the 5th century, so in the 400s.
That sort of set up the fracturing that took place later on.
It did. Because you would have competition between the bishops in those sees because of the way things were set up. Constantine, by summoning the Council of Nicaea, without intending to do so perhaps, or maybe he did, I don't know, but he essentially set up the Roman emperor as the one who settled disputes, who exercised ultimate authority over the Christian faith. And of course, Theodosius in 380 took it a step further and said, okay, this is the only official faith, so all you pagans and all you Christians who disagree over certain points of doctrine, you're heretics, and the full power of the state will come down on you. This is dangerous. I don't think it's going too far to say that Christian doctrine, the Christian faith, in terms of doctrine, was better off when it was being persecuted brutally than when it became the official, even a legal religion under the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Because Constantine was encouraging people to get baptized, whether they really accepted the faith or not. He was, in fact, offering a bonus, 10 denarii or whatever, to people who would get baptized if they were from the poorer classes. He was trying to encourage people to make this decision. He wanted it to be of their own free will, but if they accepted it, hey, then you get a little handout from the government.
But if you're really poor, you're thinking, my free will says I'd sure love that 10 denarii because I can buy 10 loaves of bread for them.
Exactly right. So you were bringing people into the faith who had no real faith and setting up a hierarchy where not only was the emperor at the top, because the church now was married to the empire, especially after Theodosius, you were making the bishops in these pentarchies and giving them authority over whether people were saved or not, giving them the power to excommunicate people. And when you've got a situation like that, where you've got church and state married, then disagreements over theology become treason.
Yes.
And political disagreements become heresy.
Yes. Well, it's clear when we see in the book of Revelation chapter 2, he says, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. Referring to Satan's throne, the idea of Satan himself being there, and then bringing in this idea that somehow that age, that church represents what took place then.
Right.
Sort of enthroning one individual with that much power. And it's not to say that the human was Satan, but the spirit behind that idea is satanic.
Absolutely. What you had was a change in tactics by the enemy, by the fallen realm. Pergamum, as we talked about last week, with the altar of Zeus and Jesus identifying Zeus, Baal, as Satan. Okay, we can see the physical representation of Satan's authority here in Pergamum. But yes, on a spiritual sense, that wise, crafty devil, who's just one among a number of rebels aligned against God, realized that they were not going to destroy the faith by persecuting it from the outside. The harder it persecuted Christians, the more intense the persecution, the stronger the faith became.
Well, like when you're training your muscles, you have to put them under pressure.
Right, exactly. So they changed tactics and decided to corrupt it from within. Let's make it an official path to wealth, to political power, and let's start bringing in these people who really don't have a strong commitment to doctrine, and in order to make it easier for them to transition to Christianity, let's not make them get rid of their old pagan practices. Now, we talk about this and write about this in the book Veneration.
And it's right here in verse 14, but I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam.
Yes.
What did Balaam do?
Well,
sent in all the pretty girls.
He sent in all the pretty girls, which encouraged the Israelite men to worship the gods of the pretty girls. And as we write in Veneration, this was not just the fertility rites and the licentious sexual practices of the Moabites, although that was part of it. Psalm 106, verse 28 makes it clear that what really provoked God to anger, and remember, this is when Moses was still with the people. I mean, the guy who was there and he held up his hand, and the Red Sea part, and the people knew it, and yet they were led astray into eating sacrifices offered to the dead.
Yes, and that is a big no-no. In fact, we see when Elijah is confronting Ahab, and he says to bring in all the priests of Baal, and all those who have eaten at Jezebel's table.
Right.
This is talking about eating things that have been sacrificed to the dead. There are ritual meals that were conducted once a month and twice a year that had a big impact on the spirit realm, supposedly preparing the dead to cross over.
Right. And archaeology confirms this, even among the early church. One of the things we discovered when we researched the book Veneration was that the earliest churches built in Rome after the Edict of Milan and after Constantine legalized the faith and said, okay, all you Christians go ahead, start building your churches up. The earliest churches built in Rome were built in the middle of cemeteries because the Christians, or those who were now calling themselves Christian, were still carrying on these practices of summoning their ancestors and eating ritual meals with the dead.
And not only did this fracture the church as far as the leadership, but it also weakened the church spiritually, so that when in 630 the Muslims come through, they were just toast.
And there were some who saw that as the judgment of God. So yes, the reason that, we'll tell you what, let's take a break, and we'll explain why when we go from the year 313 as the beginning point of the historical age represented by Pergamum. Why do we end it at 606?
And we'll talk about the white stone.
The white stone, yes. What does that represent? That's ahead when Unraveling Revelation continues.
Unveiling the ancient realms of demonic kings and Satan's battle plan for Armageddon. Skywatch TV is proud to announce 2 new special offers. The Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series. First, in Derek and Sharon Gilbert's new groundbreaking book, Veneration, you'll learn how the giants of old shaped the worldview and religion of the Hebrews, and the role they will play in the end times. How veneration of the dead brought disaster on the Israelites, concealed references of ancestor worship among the Canaanites, and so much more. But for a limited time only, when you purchase Veneration from Skywatch TV, you'll also receive Realms of the Dead, Book 6 in the Red Wing Saga from Sharon K. Gilbert, that explores the true historical link between Mount Hermon and Jack the Ripper. The key characters of this supernatural thriller will face their most terrifying challenge yet, as a powerful new watcher has joined the confrontation that could bring forth the Antichrist and the end of days. But that's not all. You'll also receive the brand new DVD documentary, The Search for the Rephaim, where Derek and Sharon Gilbert take you on a guided tour of the Holy Land, ground zero in the long war with the fallen realm. You will see mysterious Gilgal Rephaim created for the veneration of the dead, the plains of Moab, where worshiping the god of the underworld brought disaster on Israel, and bonus teachings by guests like Pastor Carl Gallups and Messianic Rabbi Zev Parat. And for a limited time only, you'll receive absolutely free the brand new reprinting of the original 1921 classic work, Immortality and the Unseen World, which reveals the Hebrew concepts of the supernatural realm, death, angels, and demons. Sold separately, this exclusive offer retails for $90. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. But wait, now you have the option to upgrade and expand your collection by including all 5 previously released books in the Red Wing Saga, where you'll learn spiritual warfare through gripping stories with characters you'll love. The expanded collection, which includes all 8 books and The Search for the Rephaim DVD documentary, holds a retail value of $190. Yours now for your donation of only $100 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. Order the Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we are talking about the church at Pergamum. Pergamus. Pergamon. It's like Istanbul and Constantinople.
Right. It depends on which translation you read, but according to scholars, they're all correct. Pergamum, Pergamos, Pergamon, potato, potato. Well, the eating of food sacrificed to idols, practicing sexual immorality, again, both aspects of the ancient religious rituals connected to the veneration of the dead in the ancient world that led Israel astray even before they got into the Holy Land, that never went away. And this was still present in the early church, as we see through archaeology. In fact, as we've discussed elsewhere, these practices are still with us in the modern world. Veneration of the dead is still a thing.
Oh, yeah.
You need to understand, when you're venerating the dead, you're actually venerating demons, the spirits of the Nephilim, the giants of old who were destroyed in the flood. They never went away. That is so important to theology, and that's why we wrote the book. But again, it never went away. The reason, now looking ahead just a little bit, the reason that the year 606 was selected as sort of the end of this period represented by Pergamum is because that's when a man named Boniface III became the Pope. He was, I think I said last week, he succeeded Gregory the Great. I was mistaken. There was another Pope who only served for about a year or two before he died, between Gregory and Boniface. Yes. But Boniface was a protege of Gregory the Great. Gregory had sent him from Rome to Constantinople, which is where the remnant of the Roman Empire lived. By the late 6th century, early 7th century, Italy was fractured. The Lombards, which was a Germanic people from the Alps, had come down and had taken over most of Italy. There wasn't much Rome left in Rome or Italy.
No, the Roman Empire was pretty much toast.
Yeah, it was what was left in the east, which was Turkey, Greece, and Mesopotamia. So Gregory sent Boniface to the east, where he became a confidant of the emperor, whose name was Phocas, Phocas. Phocas.
Boniface and Phocas sounds like a vaudeville act.
Or a law firm. Phocas became the emperor by leading a rebellion against the emperor Maurice. And Maurice apparently had been a pretty effective leader. He had managed to secure the border against Persia, because Rome and Persia had been fighting each other for centuries. For the first time in a couple hundred years, Rome had demonstrated enough muscle that they no longer had to pay hundreds of pounds of gold every year to Persia just to keep the Persians from attacking. So Maurice, effective military leader, effective governor, assassinated in a coup led by Phocas, who Boniface became friends with.
Had focus groups, and they all said...
Apparently, there was a bishop in Constantinople. And again, remember, Rome and Constantinople were the two leading bishoprics in Christendom at the time. And there was a bishop there named Syriacus, who started calling himself universal bishop. I guess he figured that
As in Catholic.
Right. He figured that because the seat of the empire was at Constantinople, not Rome, that the bishop of Constantinople should be the one to tell all the other bishops what they should do. And Gregory didn't like that, so he said to Boniface, like, look, if you can get the ear of the emperor, maybe you can get him to work on that a little bit. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But Boniface did, before he headed back to Rome, obtained a decree from Emperor Phocas that, and I quote, the see of the blessed Peter the Apostle should be the head of all the churches, end quote. Now, a couple of years after Boniface went back to Rome, Phocas himself was assassinated and taken out by because the Persians had risen up, they realized that Phocas was not really a leader, and so they began to invade again. They basically wore each other out over the next couple of decades, just in time for the Arab armies led by the successors of Muhammad to come out of Arabia and destroy the Persians and Rome.
And then the Italian peninsula really did just separate into various...
right.
Yeah, exactly. And it stayed that way until the 19th century.
It pretty much did, right. And that created conditions under which the Roman Church eventually became highly political. It was already by 606, you could see that decree was used to justify Rome declaring its primacy over the church. But I think we looking backward now from our perspective, give Rome too much credit, especially in the 7th century, because the Eastern Church, in fact, the Eastern Church to this day does not acknowledge Rome as its superior. The Orthodox churches don't.
But listen to this. This is what I find interesting. You've just told us that everything that happened led up to being, frankly, prey to the Arab invasion. So also you have some who hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. This is verse 15. Therefore, repent. If not, I will come to you soon and war against them with the sword of my mouth. That is what happened. The Lord allowed the sword to come in and take down the church.
A couple of levels in that, because the sword of my mouth is the word of God.
Exactly.
But yes, most of Christendom in the 7th century was made victim to the actual sword, the sword of Islam.
Exactly.
Because by the end of the 7th century, let's say within 100 years of Muhammad's death in 632, by the year 732, all of North Africa, all of Mesopotamia, Persia, most of Anatolia, which was where the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, controlled, and even Spain had fallen to Islamic armies.
Yes.
So, it was a pretty drastic change that took place in the 100 years after. And we don't think enough about, that's why I wrote the book Bad Moon Rising, we don't think enough about the influence of Islam on the West. We just sort of ignore it and look at the fight. And even while that was going on, there was still this infighting amongst the different Roman churches or bishops for supremacy.
Because we are running out of time, we only have 5 minutes left.
Stone. Yes.
Verse 17, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. Now, why would he say this? Let me tell you, within that city, in the region, that whole Acropolis where you found the temple of Zeus, was also the Asclepion. It was a temple to Asclepius, the god of healing. Think Apollo here. The snake on the pole. It's Nehushtan.
Right.
It's Demutzi. We've talked about that before, but this is the temple of healing. So people would go there, they would see the priests, they would say, hi, here are my symptoms, this is what's going on, got leprosy, pretty sure, can you heal it? Okay, go down, and you would meet with a local doctor, but they were actually priests, and they would pray for you. And when you were healed, they would hand you a stone with your name, your new name, your healed name written on it, and you would offer it up to the god. Instead, the Lord is giving you a stone, and there's a brand new name that he has given you, and no one else will know it.
There's even more to it than that. The process, as I understand it, because I was doing some reading on this last night as well, is that they would go to the temple, And first of all, they wouldn't let anybody in whose condition was terminal.
Exactly.
Because death not allowed here. So
No,
hey, if
you
we know
cannot have that associated with this God of
right,
healing.
Exactly. So only people they knew they could cure would come in.
Yeah.
But they would be given a sedative, and then they would lie. They would sleep the night in the Asclepion, where a lot of snakes, non-poisonous snakes, were allowed to crawl around. The snakes would crawl all over the people who were sleeping. The idea was that the serpent would come and whisper in your ear and give you a dream, and then whatever you dreamed, you would tell the priest. The priest would interpret the dream and then prescribe a course of healing.
Based on the dream.
Based on the dream. But then they give you the white stone. So this was how you were then beholden to this God who spoke to you through a serpent.
Yes.
Yeah. That makes even more sense. We talked about the temple here, to go back to the temple, the altar of Zeus, and the frieze on the outside, the gigantomachy.
Yes, yes.
The war between the Olympians and the giants created, who sprang up from the earth, Gaia, when the blood of Uranus, after he was castrated, hit the earth. Those giants were depicted as men from the waist up, but their legs were snakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, you can see that in the frieze.
So there's the serpentine aspect to all of these supernatural entities.
Well, I mentioned Demutzi, who was the consort, the husband to Inanna, and he was a demigod. So he was the son of a human and a god, and which we see a lot. And you and I have a theory, at least I have a theory, of what's called hybrid vigor, that somehow a hybrid is better than either. You're better than humans, and you're better than these Elohim that fathered you. So we see that in the Antichrist, that it's a human who is, in other words, he's fully human, fully Elohim.
Well, that's how they're going to present it.
That's how
the spirit will enter into a man, and he will become
a hybrid. Theseus was a hybrid. He's in the Red Wing Saga, by the way. But this idea of hybrids being better. Well, Demutzi was a hybrid, and when he was told, you have to go down to hell, to the underworld, and replace your wife Inanna, because otherwise she has to stay down there. So because she doesn't like you right now, you have to go down there. Well, he got away in some of the poems. It's claimed he got away by saying, please turn me into, speaking to a god, his father, saying, please turn me into a dragon. Give me snakes' feet and dragon's feet, and allow me to slither through this. And he was often pictured as a snake on a pole.
Right. And we remind you that the rebel in Eden was Nakash, a word that is often translated as serpent in the Bible. So again, that serpentine theme here.
Which is actually a dragon.
Which is a dragon, right. This fits with what we read about the church of Pergamum. The other interesting thing about this, too, is that this was the period during the church when, thanks to Augustine, who was a brilliant man, trying to syncretize practices that they couldn't exterminate from the church, that's when they began to pray to the saints, which was just a Christianized version of the veneration of the demigods of the Rephaim, the ancestors.
Yes, the demons.
Yes. The Church of Compromise, the Church of Pergamum. Next week, we start on Thyatira. Ooh. Thank you for watching. With Sharon Gilbert, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV.